here we go again, cruising up and down the coast of South Vietnam. How many patrols has it been this month? 6? Or is it 7? Making sure no one tries to bring in men or materials to the Viet Cong. 3 days at sea and then 1 day off. Do this 3 times, then get 5 days off. Throw in an extra patrol once in a while and you're at sea 70% of the time. What a life. Better than 500,000 miles on patrol in just a year for the squadron. More than 65,000 vessels boarded or inspected. Uh-oh, here comes another one, just like all the rest. Well, let's get it over with. Get ready to board. Funny what they call this patrol duty. Operation Market Time. Sounds kind of peaceful, doesn't it? But don't let the name fool you. It's a tough job they've given to the Coast Guard. Patrolling the sea approaches to the Republic of Vietnam. Any one of these vessels we board can be helping the Viet Cong. Look at a map of South Vietnam and you can see what the problem is. Almost 1,000 miles of coastline. Much of it controlled by the enemy. Since there are so few inland roads, people have always hauled things along the coast and up and down the rivers in boats. Trawlers, junks, sampans, and little basket boats. There must be 1 million of them, mostly peaceful fishing vessels or cargo boats or floating markets. But among them are some that carry guns or ammunition, food or medical supplies for the Viet Cong. They operate right offshore. And when the United States first got involved in helping the South Vietnamese defend themselves, there didn't seem to be any way to put a stop to enemy coastal traffic. The U.S. Navy just didn't have enough of the right kind of boats that could operate right there in shallow water with them. But then someone thought of the Coast Guard.
Back in the States, we were operating a fleet of 82-foot cutters on search and rescue missions along our own coastline. These boats were self-sufficient. They could do almost anything. The 82-footer was air-conditioned, so the crew could stay comfortable no matter what the climate outside. This would be especially important in the hot, muggy coastal regions of Vietnam. Food? With our freezers, we could keep plenty of chow on board, enough for a week or even more at sea, if we had to stay out that long. Yep, we were well stocked. Only thing to be added was a little imagination from the cook. Each of our 82-footers had radar on board to help us find vessels in distress. We kept pretty busy enforcing our maritime laws and looking after the safety and well-being of the people who use our waters. I guess you'd have to say we were made to order for the patrol and inspection job to be done in Vietnam. So it was no real surprise to any of us when the orders came.
The hardest part's always saying goodbye to the kids. It's not easy to explain to them or their mothers why you have to go off to war. But those of us who had to go understood this was our job. And some of us older types had been training for this moment for more than 20 years, ever since the last time the Coast Guard went to war. The Coast Guard Receiving Center at Alameda, California was the gathering point for this first group of us. And here we learned we were the first members of newly commissioned Coast Guard Squadron 1. We also learned that we would soon move on from Alameda to begin special training at the Navy's Amphibious Training Base Pacific, Fib Trapac, down near San Diego. But there were a few details to be attended to first. We were all experienced men, and most of us remembered what you had to go through for this kind of emergency assignment. It really brought back memories. Ouch. You've heard the expression, tell it to the Marines? Well, at Fib Trepac, it was the Marines' turn to do the talking. And they were our instructors, and there was a lot they had to tell us about the newer weapons being used in Vietnam, like the M14 rifle, the replacement for the old M1 of World War II. We took the M14 apart and put it back together again. Then we went out to the range to see if we remembered how to fire a rifle. So we were a little rusty at first, but we'd get better. There, told you so. One weapon we get to know very well was the 50 caliber machine gun. At that very moment, each of our 82-footers was being fitted out with 4 50 caliber gun mounts. The main battery would be an ingenious weapon designed by a Coast Guard officer, a 50 riding piggyback on an 81 millimeter mortar. It would be used on many small naval craft operating in Vietnam.
Man, if you think I handle those 81 millimeter shells like they were hen's eggs, you're right. Guess that's why they decided the cook ought to be a gunner in his spare time. That's the way it is in the Coast Guard. Like you get out there in the range, and you never know who's going to be working beside you. Might be a chief, or even one of the officers. There's no exclusive job club in this kind of business. We all learn a lot of different jobs, and we learn them together. Because that's the way we work in the Coast Guard, together. They didn't leave anything out, I'll tell you. But all this was just leading up to the main event, survival training.
Okay, so you ask, why were they interested in teaching us survival up here in the mountains? Well, look at it this way. The main object is to learn to stay alive. And if one of our cutters ever got run aground, well, we might just have to take to the hills or to the jungle. So we learned to tell what plant life we could eat and what we couldn't. Greens, the instructor called them. Almost made them sound appetizing. But let me tell you, they weren't. They'd keep us alive, though, and that was the real point. Of course, we had to know how to prepare an animal if we were lucky enough to kill one. This was old hat to those of us who were hunters. But to the rest of the group, it was information that could be very important where we were going. Like learning about skinning a rabbit. Most of the guys didn't know you can tell if it's good to eat by the color of its liver. Bright red and it's down the hatch. But if it's gray, better look elsewhere for chow, old buddy.
The climax of all this stateside training was called resistance to interrogation. This was a little play acting we all knew was coming and thought we were ready for. But when it happened, wow. After the first 20 seconds, as far as we were concerned, it was for real. The idea was to get us used to the way we might be treated if we were captured. And I'd say they got the point across all too convincingly. All of a sudden, that old Navy tradition, don't give up the ship, took on a special modern significance. Conveniently, the training included a rescue by friendly natives. We all took off for the bush like our lives really did depend on it. Don't think they didn't have a time convincing us to come back when the game was over. We just weren't quite ready to trade our freedom for a ride back to camp in that truck. And when it all ended, every man among us agreed that this had been the most impressive training exercise he'd ever been subjected to. We were all better men for having gone through it, and we were ready now to move on to the real battle, 10,000 miles away in Vietnam.
By this time, our 82-footers were being loaded on merchant ships and soon were on their way across the Pacific. We would meet again for shakedown and staging at the U.S. Naval Base at Subic Bay in the Philippines.
These first arrivals were visited and reviewed personally by the Commandant of the U.S. Coast Guard and the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury. Just in case you've forgotten, the Coast Guard served under the Treasury Department for 176 years. But in wartime, or when directed by the President, it becomes a service of the Navy. At Subic Bay, Squadron 1, the Coast Guard's first wartime squadron since World War II, was divided into two divisions, 11 and 12, each one ready for action in Vietnam.
It was a rough South China Sea we had to cross, but the trip to Vietnam did give us a chance to get our sea legs back again. Besides, many of our search and rescue missions back in the States took place in seas just like these, so we felt right at home. With the nearby division mothership seeing that our fuel tanks were filled, we just kept plowing along, eager to get started on our new job.
On paper, it looked simple. Division 11 would operate from the village of An Thoi on the island of Phu Quoc, patrolling the coastline of the Gulf of Thailand to the Cambodian border. Division 12 would operate from Da Nang in the northernmost coastal section of the Republic of Vietnam to seal off the border with the Communist North at the 17th parallel. The area in between would be covered by Division 13, due to arrive later. Yes, it all looked so simple on paper. But the job itself, well, that's another story. It was July 1965. We moved out on our first patrols, from An Thoi in the south and from Da Nang in the north. It was amazing to think that only 81 days before, we had been on peacetime duty back in the States. By now, we had painted a less conspicuous gray color over the peacetime white of our 82-footers. We were at war, part of the U.S. Navy's Coastal Surveillance Force. Our mission was clear: halt the movement of men and material to the enemy.
At first, to accomplish our mission, we had to stop every vessel we came across. Stop them, check their papers, board, and search them. This was the only way to tell if a vessel might be helping the Viet Cong. Friend and enemy, they all flew the flag of South Vietnam. Soon we found it was impossible to board and search every one of the thousands of boats that roam the coastal waters every day, but we got most of them as they came and went on their daily journeys between villages and to the fishing grounds.
Every South Vietnamese carries an identification card, and every vessel carries a manifest. It was my job as liaison officer with the Navy of the Republic of Vietnam to ride the U.S. Coast Guard's patrol boats, to know what to look for on the vessels we stopped, then to make sure only what was authorized on board was actually there.
It was tedious work, beginning before dawn and often lasting until midnight, when the boats would be back in port. That gave us time for as many as 60 boardings a day by a single cutter. While the great majority of the people we stopped were loyal citizens of the Republic of Vietnam, we never knew when we'd meet someone who wasn't. That old man, for example, his son might be a guerrilla leader, and the grain in his little cargo junk could be concealing Viet Cong guns and ammunition. That young boy, under his clothing could be hidden a belt of live grenades. That fisherman, he could be a Viet Cong fighting man, carrying important information back to his unit. We never knew, so every boarding was handled as if this were it.
We found a lot of things we weren't looking for, but we gave them our attention anyway. Like this little kid with the burned stern. I'm no doctor, but when you have kids of your own back home, you just can't let something like this go by without trying to help. Everyone says Americans are suckers when it comes to kids, and I guess we are. But all of us wanted to do what we could to ease some of the pain these youngsters were suffering out here. Fact is, we passed out candy to the kids or cigarettes for the grown-ups whenever we could get them. Before long, they actually seemed to want us to stop them and come aboard. Seeing how much these people appreciated even the smallest help got us started on a program where the crew of each cutter would sort of adopt and look after a village. On a day when we weren't on patrol, we'd drop in on the villagers, bring them packages we'd put together ourselves, or our wives or some civic group would have sent from the States. Nothing big, just things like soap, needles and thread, writing paper, towels, little things people in these remote villages couldn't easily get for themselves. It was all unofficial, just a personal thing we wanted to do. These villagers are really wonderful people. They live today just the way their ancestors did many years ago. That means they often don't get the right kind of medical attention. So with the help of Navy medical corpsmen from our mothership, we do what we could to help them out. We enjoyed our visits to the villages and seeing how much we came to mean to the people there. Of course, they came to mean just as much to us.
Well, the days began turning into weeks, and these weeks into months. And the Coastal Surveillance Force was making Operation Market Time pay off. The new division, number 13, arrived early in 1966. It was a happy occasion. Now, Coast Guard 82-footers would be on patrol with the U.S. Navy and South Vietnamese vessels along the entire coastline, from the Cambodian border to the 17th parallel. By this time, a number of cutters had fought engagements with enemy vessels and had intercepted supplies and weapons being smuggled to the Viet Cong, many of them of communist Chinese origin. In fact, in the first year, we prevented 250 tons of equipment from getting into enemy hands. We were effectively cutting off the coastal and river routes into Viet Cong strongholds, and the communists were being forced to turn to land transport for their supplies. So we kept at it. Each cutter, 3 days out on patrol, and in for one day 5 times over. Even when the weather was so lousy, we knew no one in his right mind, except us, of course, would be out at sea. Then, mercifully, we could come in to take that 5-day break before starting the cycle all over again.
Those breaks gave us a chance to unwind a little. Some of us hurried to undergo a bit of therapeutic treatment at the native bistros. Others would help raise the level of the economy by patronizing the native emporiums. Of course, all of us kept the local service establishments busy. Occasionally, some of us would even get to see something of this country we had come so far to help defend.
Often while we relaxed before the next round of patrols, maintenance crews back on the division mothership were busy keeping the 82-footers in shape. In just 1 year in Operation Market Time, we were giving the engines the equivalent of 8 years of peacetime use. But they could be overhauled right on the spot by the Navy and Coast Guard crew on the mothership and be ready to go once more in time for the next patrol.
Underway again, and we found ourselves helping the war effort in a number of ways. Our guns were sometimes called upon to support friendly forces ashore. The forward air-controlled aircraft could see the enemy. We couldn't. But we just kept firing, hitting the area where the spotter plane told us it would do the most good. Available to help South Vietnamese fighting teams into battle zones. But our main job was still searching for men and materials being smuggled to the enemy. And we kept at it day and night. This kind of duty meant we sometimes had to hold worship services underway. Sure, our altar was built out of ammo boxes, and our older boys weren't particularly dressed for the occasion, and only the few men not on watch could attend at any one time. But war is like that. We were sure God would understand. A spiritual lift like this was important to us all, because we knew that we might find ourselves right in the thick of a knockdown, drag-out fight with the enemy at any time.
Amen. Especially at night. Our radar would pinpoint something unusual. We'd close in and challenge the vessel. If they were up to some shenanigans, chances are they would reply with, "We could dish it out, so we'd let them have it right back."
In the first year of Operation Market Time, U.S. Coast Guard Squadron 1 destroyed or captured 22 enemy junks and 2 steel-hulled vessels without loss of a single cutter. Close to 100 Viet Cong were confirmed killed, wounded, or captured, in addition to many unconfirmed enemy casualties. More than 65,000 junks and sampans were boarded or inspected, and hundreds of suspects were apprehended and turned over to the Vietnamese government. And most important of all, the sea lanes along the South Vietnamese coast were effectively closed to the enemy. There's been a right fair share of heroes during Operation Market Time. South Vietnamese naval personnel and officers and men of the United States Coast Guard. Together they have braved the blistering fire of a fanatical enemy and stayed at their stations until the battle was won, all sharing danger in a joint effort to prove once and for all that aggression cannot and will not be allowed to persist. So the men of the United States Coast Guard continue their Operation Market Time patrols, teamed with the U.S. Navy, keeping the sea approaches to South Vietnam closed to enemy forces.
How many patrols has it been this month? 6? Or is it 7? 3 days at sea, 1 day in, over and over again, then 5 days off, then start it all over again. Well, sure, it's monotonous. Sure, it beats us down to our socks. But let's face it, it's our job. Uh-oh, here comes another one. Here we go again.